Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating corner of the tech world. It's where innovation isn't just about building something totally new from scratch. Sometimes, the biggest leaps happen when you figure out how to make two existing powerhouses finally work together properly.
Yeah, like combining different strengths for a better outcome.
Exactly. Think of it like, I don't know, pairing a champion weightlifter's strength with a gymnast's precision. That's kind of the synergy we're exploring today. But in semiconductors, our focus is this potentially revolutionary new way to seamlessly integrate gallium nitride, that's GaN, with standard silicon chips. And this wasn't just some small tweak, it's a method developed by researchers over at MIT, a potential game changer. So our mission today is to unpack how this seemingly very technical breakthrough could actually impact the electronics you use every single day, from your smartphone right up to future tech we can barely even picture yet.
And the real aha moment here for you listening is that this isn't just about, making chips faster for the sake of speed. It's more about making really high-performance tech much more accessible and way more efficient, which, could actually lead to things like significantly better battery life in your phone.
Yeah.
And who doesn't want that?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the basics then. What exactly is gallium nitride, or GaN? We hear it mentioned as the second most used semiconductor after silicon. That alone tells you it's important. But why? Why is it such a big deal?
Right. So GaN has these really unique properties. They make it perfect for specific high-performance jobs where silicon kind of struggles. Silicon's the workhorse, no doubt, it's everywhere. Yeah. But GaN excels where silicon hits its limits, especially with high power and high frequencies.
Okay, like what kind of applications?
Well, things like efficient lighting LEDs, for instance, sophisticated radar systems. But where it really shines is in high-speed communications. 5G, 6G, and also the power electronics that run modern data centers, keeping everything cool and efficient. In those areas, its performance, especially how efficiently it handles power and heat compared to silicon, is just, much better.
Which leads to the obvious question then. Why do we even need something beyond silicon? I mean, silicon powers pretty much everything in our digital world, right? From supercomputers down to tiny chips in our coffee makers.
That's a fair point. Silicon is fantastic for processing logic, for the brains of the operation. But it's not always the best for handling raw power or operating at super high frequencies efficiently.
Okay. So that brings us to the problem. If GaN is so good at that stuff, why isn't it already everywhere? Why isn't my phone packed with GaN? What were the hurdles, the limitations that kept it sort of niche?
Yeah, that's the crux of it. Historically, it boiled down to two big things. GaN is expensive to produce, and integrating it smoothly with standard silicon chips was really, really difficult. The techniques were specialized, often incompatible with existing manufacturing lines.
How did they used to try and combine them then, before this new method?
Well, there were a couple of main approaches, but they both had serious drawbacks. One way was literally soldering GaN components onto the silicon CMOS chip. It worked, kind of, but the connections themselves were relatively large, and that limited how small you could make the GaN transistors, which is a problem because tinier transistors generally mean higher operating frequencies, faster switching.
Right, because the electrons have less distance to travel.
Exactly. So soldering created this performance bottleneck, kind of defeating the purpose of using high-speed GaN in the first place.
Okay, what was the other way?
The other idea was to integrate a whole GaN wafer on top of a silicon wafer.
That sounds expensive.
Extremely expensive. Because on a typical chip, you only need GaN for a few specific tiny transistors that handle high power or frequency, not the whole chip area. So you'd end up wasting almost all of that very costly GaN wafer material. It just wasn't economical for mass market devices.
So we were stuck. We needed GaN's performance for, say, better 5G or more efficient power conversion, but the old methods were either too costly or they limited the performance anyway. A real catch-22.
Precisely. We needed a way to get just the tiny bits of GaN we needed, exactly where we needed them on the silicon chip, without breaking the bank or compromising performance.
Enter MIT. So tell us about their breakthrough. What's this new fabrication process?
Okay, so this is where it gets really clever. The MIT team and their collaborators developed a new method. And the key things are, it's designed to be low cost, scalable, meaning you can do it affordably on a large scale, and crucially, it works with existing semiconductor manufacturing setups.
No need for entirely new exotic factories then.
That's the goal. They call it the dielet method. Yeah, dielet.
Okay.
So instead of whole wafers or clumsy soldering, they first make lots of these minuscule GaN transistors all over a GaN wafer. Then, and this is neat, they use a very fine laser to essentially cut out only those individual tiny transistors.
Just the transistors themselves.
Just the transistors. These things are incredibly small, like 240 by 410 microns. A micron is a millionth of a meter, so we're talking microscopic. These tiny cutout pieces are the dielets.
Okay.
And then they take only the necessary GaN dielets and bond them directly onto the specific spots on the standard silicon CMOS chip where they're needed.
Wow. Okay, but sticking something that tiny onto another surface precisely, that sounds incredibly difficult. How do they actually bond them? That seems like the really tricky part.
It is. And the bonding process they figured out is arguably the most important innovation here. They used tiny copper pillars. There were copper pillars on the bottom of the GaN dielets and corresponding copper pads or pillars on the silicon chip.
Copper, not gold, like you sometimes hear about in chip bonding.
Right, copper. And the bonding is done copper to copper. The huge advantage is that this can be done at relatively low temperatures, below 400 degrees Celsius.
Why is low temperature so important?
Because high temperatures can damage both the delicate GaN material and the complex silicon circuitry that's already been built on the wafer underneath. You risk ruining the whole chip. Older methods, sometimes using gold, often needed much higher temperatures and more force to create the bond.
Which adds risk and complexity.
Exactly. Plus, gold is expensive, obviously. And another big issue is that gold can contaminate the standard tools used in semiconductor foundries. You'd need separate, dedicated, costly facilities just for that gold bonding step.
Ah, so copper avoids all that.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Copper is cheap, the bonding is low temperature, uses less force, and copper is actually a better conductor of electricity than the solder used before. It's a win-win-win.
So this copper-to-copper bonding is what really makes it practical and cost-effective.
That's a huge part of it, yes. It gets around those major historical roadblocks of cost and manufacturing compatibility. It makes high-performance GaN on silicon scalable for things like, well, your phone.
And I read they even had to build a special tool to handle these tiny dielets.
You did. Makes sense, right? You're dealing with microscopic components. They developed a tool that uses a vacuum to pick up, hold, and precisely place these dielets. It apparently aligns them to the copper bonding sites on the silicon with nanometer precision. Just incredible accuracy.
Nanometer. Wow.
Yeah. And the lead author, Pradyot Yadav, mentioned this wasn't easy. It took about 2 years of constant work, learning, bringing in different experts for each stage. You can imagine the trial and error involved.
Definitely sounds like some serious engineering challenges they overcame. So, okay, they figured out this clever, low-cost way to put tiny GaN bits exactly where needed on a silicon chip using copper bonding. Let's bring it back to the impact. What does this hybrid chip technology actually mean for us, for the devices we use?
Right, the payoff. Well, first off, cost and scalability, as we mentioned. Because you're only adding tiny amounts of GaN, the added cost is minimal. Yet I've called it a no-brainer for adoption. And because it fits with existing manufacturing, companies could potentially integrate this relatively quickly.
So easier path to market.
Hopefully. Second, the performance boost. You get the speed and power handling of GaN where you need it. Plus, an interesting side effect is that distributing these little GaN heat sources across the silicon chip can actually help manage the overall temperature better.
Lower heat means better efficiency and longer device life, usually.
Exactly. And they actually built a demonstrator, a power amplifier, which is a key part in any mobile phone or wireless device. It transmits the signal.
And how did it perform?
Their hybrid GaN on silicon amplifier showed stronger signal transmission and better efficiency compared to typical silicon-only versions.
Okay, translate that for the listener. What's the benefit for me and my phone?
It means potentially clearer calls, especially in weak signal areas, faster wireless data speeds, better connectivity overall, and the big one, potentially longer battery life.
Ah, the holy grail. How does it help battery life?
Because a more efficient amplifier wastes less power as heat when sending out signals. Less wasted power means your battery lasts longer for the same amount of usage.
Makes sense. So, immediate benefits for current tech, like phones. What about the future?
Well, because this method uses standard-ish procedures, it's not just for today's electronics. It could be a foundational technology for improving all sorts of future devices. And there's a really intriguing long-term possibility they mentioned: quantum computing.
Quantum? How does GaN fit in there?
Apparently, GaN performs better than silicon at the extremely cold cryogenic temperatures that many types of quantum computers need to operate at. So this technique for integrating GaN with silicon control circuitry might be a way to build better interfaces or components for future quantum systems. That's looking further out, obviously, but it's a fascinating potential application.
It really is. It covers the spectrum from my phone battery today to quantum computers tomorrow. No wonder Yadav was quoted saying, "We've combined the best of what exists in silicon with the best possible gallium nitride electronics. These hybrid chips can revolutionize many commercial markets."
It's a strong claim, but you can see the logic.
It really highlights the elegance, doesn't it? Not necessarily inventing a whole new material, but finding a clever way to combine the known strengths of two existing ones.
Absolutely. True innovation often happens right there at that intersection.
So, a final thought, perhaps. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how this seemingly, quite specific advance in chip making could quietly become the bedrock for the next wave of tech.
It does. Think about it. This could make our communications faster, our devices last longer, maybe even help unlock quantum computing down the line, which raises a really interesting question for you to ponder. What other unlikely combinations of materials or technologies might be out there, just waiting for a similar breakthrough to revolutionize our world in ways we haven't even thought of yet?
It's a great question to leave us with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this exciting development. We hope you feel a bit more informed and definitely excited about where this tech might lead.